Okay, good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to this parallel session. The session belongs to the application track 5, that is Smart Society, and it will focus on AI and big data for the circular economy. Next slide, please. Just a few rules for the session. You should know that all the participants except the speakers and of course the chairs will be muted during this session. You can ask for specific question using the WOWA Q&A chat. Please don't use Zoom in case you are connected through Zoom, because we will be not able to look at it. In case of technical problem, you can contact Martina Barbero from BDVA that is supporting the session. This session is recorded, so it's important to know, in particular for the speakers. Of course, we need to say thank you to the organizer, thank you for the sponsor, because without them, this session and this event would be not created. So it's many thanks to all of them, in particular to our organization sponsor and to our project sponsor. I would just mention here 3 projects of this, because they are going to manage another session that was co-organized by the track, and these are Duet, Policy Cloud, Urbanite, that will take another parallel session specifically on eGov on Thursday afternoon. I want to thank also BDVE as a project that's supporting the ecosystem around projects in under big data, and another particular thanks to the team of BDVA, so Anna Garcia, Martina Barbero, and Sina Risanen, because without them this could not be possible. Please, next slide. About these are the main people today discussing in this session. My name is Roberto Di Bernardo. I work for Engineering Ingegneria Informatica, that is the biggest ICT company in Italy. We are around 12,000 employees. I belong to R&D department dealing with the smart cities and innovation for public sectors, smart water and environment. I chair and co-chair several working groups on this topic, in particular within BDVA, within the European Cybersecurity Organization, and the Fireware Foundation. Together with me today, we are going to have Vega Rodriguez Varez, that will manage the panel, will moderate the panel session. Vega is project manager at Innova. She is a computer engineering with relevant expertise on big data and cognitive system. She is co-chairing the Smart Governance and Smart City Sub-Working Group together with me under BDVA. We also have in this session Charlotte Seiler, that is from Berlin Partner. She has a background on design thinking, focusing on digital innovation, and her main focus is to support companies, startup, and researcher to connect and then push AI innovation in Berlin. We are going to have several relevant keynote speakers and panelists here reported in the slide, but I would prefer to introduce them one by one during the keynote session. Next, please. The agenda for today, we are going to have a very quick opening keynote. I will introduce you on this keynote part. Then I will introduce all the speakers of this session. So we are going to have Circular Berlin, Pensumo, KU Leuven, and Water Europe. We are going to have, in the end, a panel discussion where all the speakers will discuss one another concerning specific question. Again, we are going to have a questions and answer part at the end, and the question will be collected through WUWA. So next, please. Briefly, this is again a session related on use AI and big data for circular economy. A quick introduction. Of course, circular economy is an alternative to the current model used in the industrial, but also in society. So it's the take, make, waste, and extractive models. Of course, the principle around the circular economy is designing out waste and pollution in order to make the overall ecosystem more resilient in terms of use of resource and sustainable, of course. And in parallel, supporting the regeneration of natural system. Why the digitalization is important? Of course, we are going to have a specific answer to this question during the introduction, so during the keynote speech, but also during the panel session. But in general, it's clear that the role that the digitalization, in particular of data and artificial intelligence, can play within the circular economy, supporting a faster learning processes, in particular, understanding and better managing the complex system behind and models, and last but not least, disrupting silos. What will be the outcome of the session? What we are supposed to that in the end you will bring at home? It will be mainly based on creating awareness, more awareness around the business model behind the circular economy, showing how information flow can enable the circular economy. The crucial role that could have the big data and artificial intelligence could have on this, but even even in some cases, even more important, we are going to identify which are the main barriers and constraints around against the adoption of this model. Next, please. So at this point, I will move to the first keynote today. I will introduce you to Dina Padalkina from Circular Berlin. Dina is actively involved in the circular economy, leading the Association of Circular Berlin, that is a no-profit organization accelerating Berlin in the transition towards a circular economy, so being a circular cities. She is involved in several projects on this topic. Dina developed 5 years of professional experience concerning strategy and business consulting, in particular in the focus in the area of technology and digital business. So Dina, the floor is yours. Many thanks.
Thank you, Roberto, for the introduction, and thank you also everyone for the invitation to this session. It's a big honor for me also to represent the organization and our work. And I will use this opportunity as well to maybe also briefly to say more words about us. Maybe next slide in this case. So as it was mentioned, we are a non-for-profit organization based here locally in Berlin. Association, we're a young organization, but what we foster is open source solutions for circular economy, and also try to promote knowledge and implement it here locally in the city to see how circular economy can support Berlin transition towards circular city. Next slide, please. What we do, we mainly operate across 3 main areas. It's knowledge building, so that's where we participate in several projects, also research projects, focusing mainly on such sectors as the built environment, product and materials, food and biomass, as well as textile and fashion, because this is the key sectors which we prioritize for Berlin work. Then we also do work on community building, because we identify ourselves as a bottom-up building organization for circular economy. That's why we believe that all organizations, initiatives, and businesses that operate in Berlin for striving the city should be actually connected and support also local agenda. And we also provide education for circular economy here on spot, but also, as I said, mainly very locally for Berlin. We also had several partners in place. Why we talk? That's right now. We can keep this slide. As I mentioned, or may also mentioned from the introduction, we don't focus on the circular economy per se as a topic. We try to see how a circular economy can work on the city level. And why it is important? Because we believe that cities actually currently are the main drivers of consumption and the powerhouse of economic and population growth. If you look on the statistics, so on the minuscule geographical areas such as cities, it's actually the high concentration of production, population, energy use, and ultimately the waste which is actually produced there. That's why we believe that if we tackle such organism as a city, that we can also address a lot of challenges which currently we face. Next slide. And in this case, our approach, we pursue that circular economy can be also addressed on the level of the cities, and it can provide more resilient, locally manageable economic systems. What we think with regards where we implement a circular economy on the city level, it means that the approaches or development will be localized, and we potentially might move away from the big global value chains, which actually we have right now in the globalized economy. At the same time, the circular economy approach is also a holistic approach, which strives for resources to be managed locally, if possible, and we try to focus what is actually needed in the if we consider city as a closed environment, what will be needed in the city to use such resources. Next slide. And in order to apply circular economy on the city level, there is an approach developed which is called urban metabolism, and that's one which we also as an organization pursue, thinking that it's something which should be integrated for managing the city resource efficiency. And in order to understand it, you can imagine city as a big organism, and you need to understand which flows entering it or entering the city and which flows getting out from the city. So in this case, you can see the big volume, what is actually consumed by the city. And we apply different strategies to map and localize these flows. Maybe next slide. We believe that, there are several approaches as well, how you can address urban metabolism, but we kind of have 4 main steps for that. What we do, first of all, it's important to understand local boundaries and local actors. By local boundaries, you can think of maybe geographical boundaries in this case, or also it could be expanded, but also it's important to understand who is actually making the economy locally. Second step is important to understand and measure the flows. Mainly in this case, when we talk about circular economy, we talk about water, energy, materials, and information. So what's get in and what's get out. Then you need to understand local systems, mainly consumption patterns. So what is consumed, what is consumed and why in particular volume. And then you need to create local collaborations and local clusters, basically to redesign circular economy strategies such as cascading and looping. And next slide, please. And mainly if we talk about data and digitalization in this case, I believe the second step is the most intensive stage for creating data. And that's where I think right now we are standing for designing the approaches for circular economy in the cities, because a lot of gaps are still there to understand these flows. Maybe next slide. And maybe directly the next one. Thank you. So now it was okay. In this case, we are facing quite often the question when we also explain this approach, who is right now actually doing circular cities in terms of moving from theory to practice. And I need to admit that it's quite complex right now, and it's not so many actors actually digging into this, but it's still one of the new approaches to develop sustainability on the city agenda. What we've done as an organization until now, thank you. So we started with the first step, as I have already mentioned, and started understanding who is actually our local stakeholders in Berlin. In our website, among community, you can see that we mapped already more than 170 initiatives here in Berlin operating towards circular economy, mainly across the sectors which I already mentioned. And I think it's already quite a big community of actors. Right now, we're on the stage really trying to create particular links between them. but it's only the beginning. If we move to the next slide. We are now trying to also, as an organization for Berlin, to start triggering the discussion how we can understand and measure flows, mainly for water, energy, materials. And that's where we now trigger several projects, for example, in Berlin, but not for the whole city, but mainly on particular district levels, to understand how we can crack the data on energy, water, and materials consumed. So, for example, we've been also last year in one of the projects in Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, is one of the local districts here in Berlin, to trigger this discussion. I need to say it's still the objective to reach this data collection is quite far for us, but I think it's always good to start on that. Maybe next slide. And how usually it's approached. So there are several layers, and that's where the discussion on why big data is important for circular economy come into place, because you need to map a lot of different layers of information to make sure that you can understand the flow. For the approach of urban metabolism, there is usually a suggestion of 5 layers of data. So you start with the context or geographical boundaries. Then you also move to biophysical characteristics of your local area. So what type of land area is there, how it's urbanized, what is the climate there. Then you move to layer 3 around urban energy metabolism parameters. So it means what I was talking about materials, water, food, energy flows, and how it's consumed. Then you also need to map the role of utilities and services. And finally it's also about policy framework. And what we observe now, for example, for Berlin, some flows you can maybe still back if it's possible. Let's forward. But I need backward. Yes, thank you. What we observed, for example, for Berlin, it's, and I would believe it's a situation for many big cities in Europe are the same, that it's possible to understand the flow for the energy balance. It's possible to understand the flow for the waste. So what is actually the amount of waste coming into place? But as a challenge, if we move to the next slide, is still to understand what is actually coming into the system. So that's actually not mapped yet. And that's where we as organizations strive a lot for support in terms of this data collection. It's also partly the issue in the regulation because of a statistic collection of the data, because right now it's not put as a priority on that. And why it is important? Because it's possible to generate the following models. For example, if we move forward on the slides. This is a classic food flow, would be imaginable for Berlin or maybe for any others entities. If we start with agriculture, food production, then there is food processing, there is retail, and there is a consumption phase. This is how linear flow would work. And if we can generate data, we can actually generate the following models for the biomass flow, so food flow, which is on the next slide. Yes, with a lot of arrows and a lot of connection and a lot of looping on that case. And this is where circular economy actually can support city to understand these flows if we start generate the data for the material incoming and consumption on that. And maybe next slide, which is final for me. It's just important to highlight, I believe, that when we talk about circular economy on the city level, we move a little bit away from the classic understanding of circular economy, which is usually talks about product design, circular business model, or industrial synergies. For circular economy on the city levels, it's important, it will impact actually local economy in this case. We'll analyze social system and will predetermine what type of jobs we need. Firstly, locally, to generate and localize processes. And that would be my final statement from the input where we're working with. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dina. It was really interesting. You keep perfectly time, so many thanks for this. And what at the moment we are taking with us out of this presentation is that for the circular economy, what is really relevant is to know and to the exact flow among cities, among the system of the cities, And where this is one of the main place where data can play a role there. It was interesting the use of urban metabolism as an approach. And you also mentioned about local actor and also awareness. So I want to, with this link to the next presentation, next keynote speaker, that is Alicia Oro Francia from Pensumo. She is a project coordinator and also project ambassador of Pensumo. Pensumo started as a project in the reality, so now it's an entity, a full living entity. Alicia have a lot of experience in circular economy and sustainable development, and she is an expert on sustainable development objectives. So please, Alicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto, for presenting Pensumo and me. I am very grateful to be here in this day in European Business Data Value Forum. And well, let's go to the point. I am here for talk about Pensumo, the new system to measure the circular economy. Next. Well, first of all, I need to tell you about a big problem in Spain, the unawareness of the circular economy. In Spain, there are a lot of brands are commitment with the circular economy, and they do more and more recyclable products. Also, there are more scraps who put a lot of effort in do or make awareness campaign of recycle. But there is a big problem. There are some people in Spain that don't understand or not connect with the recycle campaign, and for that, they broke the circular economy. In the end, the user don't recycle the final product. Next. And well, we have developed a solution. It's a massive implementation of the circular economy through the pocket technology. Next. In Pensumo, we have developed two applications. With them, we get and measure the behaviors and consumption to get the user get into the financial inclusion and in the circular economy. With Pensumo, and Recicla, we reward purchases and measurable actions by real micro contributors with them. With Pensumo, you can complete private and public pensions with purchases, and Recicla, with your daily recycle, you can get into the circular economy. Next. Well, how it works. The use is simple. Please, yeah. The user only needs the photo of the ticket or OCR, process it, and reward the action. With the recycle, the process is the same, but the photo is for the action. And we are also installing QR devices in physical store to avoid fraud and make it more comfortable to the user. Next. Well, how we make money with that? Well, we have two principal business models, Pensumo and Recicla. Pensumo is our first application, and it was born in 2013, and today a user of Pensumo can buy in physical online establishments in order to get between 2 and 4% of these purchases. And between 1 or 3% of these purchases go to Pensumo. This money is kept by an insurer until the user wants to withdraw this money. The retailer is the client, and they always pay these contributions, this reward, in order to get a different loyalty system. In the case of Recicla, this is a different application. It's developed in this pandemic, in this coronavirus era, and the client is different. The client is companies, brands, scraps, councils who won't show off their green faces. They only need to pay a sustainability pack, and the 75 and 70% go to reward this recycle of the user, and the rest go to Recicla. They get a feedback of the user, and from Recicla get a campaign final inform. This inform is about the carbon footprint avoid with this sustainability pack. Next. Well, the closest competitors as the backstabbing plans, the cashback system, and the daily life rewards. In the case of the circular economy, the closest competitors is the application of daily life rewards. In Spain exists very recently, Reciclos is a application of Ecoembes, an environmental organization in Spain, that they reward for recycle with a big machine for 1 or 2 bottles of plastic or cans with discounts or points. But with Pensumo, this reward is only current money. It's always current money. Okay? Well, this is the team. Our CEO have more of 10 years of experience in sales management. Well, I am the project coordinator, and we have Layer Roberto Ferrer is expert in data protection, and also we have a lot of components in technology, because well, this is application we need a lot of hands of technology. Next. Well, our partners, our biggest partner maybe is the European Commission, who give us a funding of 714,000 euros by the Horizon 2020 Phase 2. We have also important partners like Allianz and Caser, who believe in us the first years and now continue with us. We have also Itainnova and EBN, our principal technological partners. Also, Coeplan is an environmental organization in Spain and joined us in this year with the Recicla application. And also the AEFI, the Spanish Association of Fintechs and Insurtechs. Well, Pensumo has achieved many awards. There are some of them. Maybe the most important is the Horizon 2020 Phase 2 I speak before, and the Seal of Excellence of the European Commission. But the most important in here may be the EBDVF 8 award, Decent Work and Economic Growth, by the Spanish network of the Global Compact and the Rafael del Pino Foundation, because we achieved the financial inclusion with Pensumo. And well, particular histories about this year, the Chinese CCTV have gone in Pensumo in this year before the coronavirus, and they come here in order to record it us for get into it the documentary date of the longevity. Next. Well, we are working now in develop our technology, of course, our OCR, the blockchain technology, and the relationship with the clients and the user. Next. And also we are involved in the SGD of the European Commission and the compact. I'm sorry, I forget in English. El Pacto Mundial, the Global Compact. Yes. Not only the not only the GD8, also the 12, 11, and 13. The 11 because we are with the application we are working in this incorporating elements for the smart city transformation. In the 12 we are incorporating a loyalty created to implement a continuous consumption chain in a local environment. And the 13 because with the gamification with Recicla we are avoid part of this carbon footprint. Next. And well, I finished with this video of Pensumo. Thank you. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's with subtitles.
Oh, sorry.
En los comercios físicos asociados o en las tiendas online de todos los sectores, encontrarás en compras consumo. Pero Pensumo es mucho más. Tu estilo de vida y tus actividades también pueden ser premiadas. Pensumo propone retos de reciclaje, seguridad vial, voluntariado, colaboración, deportivos, lectura, altruismo, transporte público. Suma céntimos por reciclar envases, andar en bici o consumir cultura. A tu póliza de ahorro garantizada, llegan las aportaciones de los comercios y partners asociados. Déjate querer y suma cada día, durante todos los días de tu vida. Porque consumes cada día, puedes ahorrar también cada día acumulando para tu futuro. Únete al sistema que va a revolucionar el mundo de las pensiones con el apoyo del programa Horizonte 2020 de la Comisión Europea.
Thank you for listening to me. I am Alicia Oro, and this is Pensumo, a new system to measure the circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. At the end of this session, again, thank you also for keeping your presentation in the right time. And at the end of this presentation, I would say we have a clear link with the previous one where we talked about local actors. In this case, you are stressing the point to have more awareness among all the stakeholders involved in cities. On the other side, you mentioned that allow you to implement the model of Pensumo. It's a loyalty system, so it's also a matter of sharing data and also using personal data in order to implement this model. With this point make a good connection with the next speaker. So I will introduce Charlotte Tuquin she is a PhD fellow researcher at Center for IT and IP Law at KU Leuven. So it's a good another angle, another perspective looking at the circular economy, because she is experienced in law. She has a master's degree in law, and in particular also in political science, but also with specialization on intellectual property and ICT law in KU Leuven. She is currently involved in several research projects dealing with datification of the circular economy and using data as commodity. So please, Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you everyone for having me and for organizing this. I'm very happy to be here, well, remotely, but whatever. Well, as you said, I work for a research center that is actually not specifically dedicated to the circular economy, to the environment, etc. What we are doing is research in law with relation to new technologies. So what we're involved with now is AI, big data, data protection, robotics, human enhancement, etc., etc. And the circular economy has come to the fore as part, from the time being at least, as part of our research track on data, how to regulate data, how to govern data. So it's obviously a very broad topic. Next slide, please. Well, it's my table of content. I will be very quick on the two first slides, and I will be a bit more, I will be focusing a bit more on the three following ones, which are a bit more legal, so to say. So next, please. Thanks. So what is the circular economy? I think now is no longer the time to explain what it is. So you'll keep the slides in case it can be useful. This is a figure that I got from the European agency. So next slide. So why are data crucial for the circular economy? So what I'm looking at here is really about the datafication of the circular economy. There's a growing pattern in saying that we need data for the circular economy. So I'm looking at this not from a business or technological perspective, but from a lawyer's perspective. So you could say three types of actors do need data for the circular economy. So first, public institutions, broadly speaking. They want to monitor the circular economy. They want to set up indicators of the circular economy. You can also add here NGOs, as we saw from the first speakers, who also try to set up such indicators. So public institutions, they want to enhance the circular economy, and especially they want to support the opening up of new markets, which would be circular economy based. So second type of actors are companies. Again, a very broad term, because you can have so many types of companies, so many value chains involved. So why are companies in need of data? Well, they are in need of data for the creation of new circular economy based business model. And I think the example of the second speaker is really a case in point. We want data to produce better in the sense of the circular economy. We want data to comply with self-monitoring obligations that are very likely to arise. And finally, on a more general level, companies need data in order to interact between each other in a dedicated value chain to, well, turn a value chain into a circular economy based one, to say it very quickly. Finally, consumers. Well, I don't know whether we can talk about data here or information more generally. So small data, you could say. It's still very much of an open question, but it's clear that the consumers must be part of the story. They need information in order to make better decisions, better economic decision on consumption, use and discount. And I would go a bit beyond that. I would say that beyond the consumer, we also have the citizen as a decision maker in a democracy. And citizens, for that perspective, they also need data in order to participate in a democratical state or, well, next, yes, just my conclusion. So big data is said to be a key enabler for the circular economy. Data, more generally speaking, are necessary in order to plan the circular economy. And a very important point, well, that was my last point, yes, thanks. We have a variety of purposes and of entities that need data, and that leads me to indeed my next slide. Thanks, yes. So why do we need research in law? Because that was my initial point. How does it have anything to do with the circular economy with respect to data? So first, we could have an increase in data so much that it could lead to an increase in consumption of resources, which would be exactly the opposite as what we want in the circular economy in case we consume too much data without, well, a good purpose, so to say. So that's the first thing. Next, please. Second thing is, from a more legal perspective, the data we need are mainly data that are currently held by private companies or not even produced, but that could be produced by private companies. But in this case, we have to respect certain protections. So we have to respect trade secrets that is legally protected. We have to respect intellectual property rights of companies. And more generally speaking, we have these fundamental rights of freedom to conduct a business that protects companies. So my intermediary conclusion is this pleads against an open data paradigm, where you would say, well, all data that stem from companies, they should be made available for everyone to use in order to recycle the goods. That wouldn't be fair for the companies that, for instance, for the manufacturers in the first place. My third element is, again, a very legal one. Talking about data. Well, the legal status of data is a very debated one right now. We don't have property rights on data or ownership rights on data. That's, again, a very broad discussion, especially at the EU level. What we have instead is context-specific legal framework of data, meaning that, well, for every sector, you may have different rules. You may have rules that say that you should open data. In other cases, because of trade secrets, you want to close data. You have IP rights that come into the picture. You have data protection that come into the picture. So it's becoming very blurred. Another factor that blurs the legal framework of data is you have a blurring between private and public domains with respect to data. In this case, it's very clear that you may want private data, so to say, stemming from companies for the sake of, for instance, public institutions doing the economic planning or setting up indicators. So you see that data, they are in a way private, but they could be reused for public purposes. You also have a variety of actors that are potentially involved, as I already said, so it makes it much more difficult to balance the interests at stake with data. Next, please. Thanks. So the last drawing is a bit messy. It's because it's where the question starts. So my belief is, my research hypothesis rather, is we need governance with respect to data. It's not only my perspective, but it's a broadly shared perspective. You can see this with claims that we need materials passport or product passport. The idea being that take product passport, for instance, you would have a certain number of information, potentially in electronic form, that would be produced by the manufacturer on the product in order to make it possible to recycle, to reuse, etc., based on certain information on the good. But this passport would also be enhanced throughout the value chain by other actors. And the idea is that in this passport that is dynamic in essence, you would have all the data that are needed, but not everyone would have access to all data. It depends, there would be some sort of need to know basis. So this leads me to, well, okay, we need governance mechanisms. We cannot make it an open system, and we can't make it a closed system, or in which case no data would be available. So we are at CITIP, so at my research center, we are exploring options. The notion of data of public interest that was born in France is an interesting notion to try and figure out how to deal with it. We are also looking at collaborative governance mechanisms, such as commons, poolings, data trusts, some concepts that are gaining traction in the data governance research track. We are also looking at data rights. Okay, maybe ownership is not what you should have on data, but maybe you should have certain types of rights on data. For instance, you should distribute usage rights on data to certain persons. So this is a very broad topic that, of course, goes beyond the circular economy as such. Next slide, please. Okay, I think there was something wrong with the slide. It should be smaller so that you can see the last line. I don't know why it's not visible, but okay. Just to make it a bit clearer, to take a concrete example, so we could compare what we need for the circular economy with respect to data with the legal framework for environmental data. So we have a directive that was transposed. It's an old one, rather old one. So in environmental data law, what we have is data from public authorities that should be made available in case they are considered environmental data. They should be made available to the public, to the general public. So who are the beneficiaries in this case? Well, citizens, NGO, the public at large. And the purposes for making those data available, broadly available, are, you could say, political purposes. So the idea is to raise awareness to environmental issues. The idea is that these data are supposed to be of general interest. So you want to trigger public debate. You want to trigger further action on environmental issues. And then I can't see the last slide. So, well, I will get my own slides. Yeah, so my last line was data governance model. So in the case of environmental data, you have open data in the sense that this data is available for everyone to use. But in the circular economy, you have to have more granularity. So we are mostly talking about data from private companies. As for the beneficiaries, well, it depends upon the data, it depends upon the context, could be public authorities, companies, consumers, citizens, etc. Same goes for the purposes for making data available. You could have many purposes, as I said before. monitoring the circular economy and getting information on the data in order to better recycle the products is obviously something quite different. So as a consequence, I think you need to have more granularity between open and closed data. So what I said before, I hope it makes my point more concrete. So next slide, please. So these are my intermediary conclusions, because obviously the research is still very much at the beginning phase. The circular economy is not a sectoral issue, although it may translate into sectoral actions, but it's a horizontal issue in the sense that with the circular economy, we aim to rechannel the whole economy. So in a sense, it's political economy that we want to do here. So it raises a question that we already have in research on how to govern data. The question is how to draw the line, where to draw the line between horizontal and sector-specific regulation of data. Data are inherently very context-specific, but at the same time, we see questions in relation to who should get access to what data, at what cost, blah, blah, blah. We see these questions arising in many contexts, many different contexts. Probably you've read the data strategy from the European Commission. It was also discussed in other panels. Clearly, the European Commission is also wondering about similar questions. So they have this common European Green Deal data space that includes smart circular applications, especially for a few sectors. They want to implement digital product passports. So they don't mention materials passport, but products, more generous to say. And I find it very interesting. They want to develop architecture and governance mechanisms by 2020. But as far as I know from the European Commission, they don't know yet how to concretely operationalize it. So basically, nobody actually knows how to make it work. But as a lawyer, I might be biased, but I think we need laws to do this. Goodwill is likely not to be enough. But I know that's my lawyer's bias, of course. And I think especially we need law with respect to, well, the legal governance of data, not only of products, consumer law, etc. So that was it for me. I hope I was as good as timekeeping as the other speakers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Charlotte. Many thanks. Fine, really fine enough. For timekeeping, for the content, really much interesting, giving another perspective. If I wanted to create a link with the next talk, I would let's say take some words from your presentation that are about companies. So you touched point of companies, you touched point of comply with self-monitoring obligations. You talked about interaction among different actors, mainly private entity, data governance, and I will also include freedom to conduct businesses, and in particular in those domains that are quite, I would say, conservative in the approach. So in this sense, I now introduce Andrew Collier, that can bring his expertise from relevant big private entity. In the previous work, it worked for General Electric's water, and then now it's in the Suez company group that I think it doesn't need any presentation, like one of the most important actor in the water sector at Europe, but also at worldwide. At Suez, Andrew lead the digital acceleration program, in particular, that deliver around 10-15 digital projects every 6 months. In particular, Andrew today is representing part Suez. It's representing is an ambassador of Water Europe, that is the European technology platform on water. Andrew within Water Europe, it's the leader of the Digital Water Vision leadership team that is also pushing for the digital waters agenda of Water Europe. So I'm really happy, Andrew, to give the floor to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Roberto. And it is a nice segue. I will share a case study at the end, and we'll see some of these themes coming back. So today I want to focus more on the smart water economy, and I'll be sharing perspectives from Water Europe and from Suez. Just by way of introduction, if we go to the next page, for those who don't know Water Europe, it's a member-based organization that's really focused on developing a water smart society. It was initiated in 2004 by the European Commission as the European technology platform for water. And it has now a growing membership of more than 224 members, multinationals, utility companies, 100 research and development developers, so a very cross-functional. We're organized in a matrix between different vision leadership teams. These can represent different thematics like digital water, but also smart cities, rural areas, industries, as well as more technical working groups. And Roberto is part of one of our ICT technical working groups. From the Suez side, I bring the private company perspective. For those of you who don't know Suez, we focus mainly on water and waste management, water, industrial water treatment, but also municipal services, drinking water, distribution networks, wastewater treatment. And on the recycling recovery side, collection, sorting, recycling, energy from waste plants, pretty much anything you can imagine. We also have a growing segment, which we call environmental technologies and solution, which is where a lot of our digital capabilities rely. And this is where we are improving the performance of our operation thanks to things like big data and AI. For me, I have a background in sustainability and business, as Roberto shared. I'm from Philadelphia, USA, so I'm keenly watching the US election today, and I currently live in Paris, France. So nice to be with you, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Next slide. If we look a little bit at Water Europe's digital focus, we reference two key frameworks as a guide that come from the European Commission. These would be the European Green Deal and Europe Fit for the Digital Age. And if you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to take note of a publication that's referenced there on the bottom right. Our contributions to the European Green Deal and Horizon Europe from 2020 to 2027. In that, you'll find this simplified schematic of the water cycle, which you remember, I'm sure, a version of this from your education, where we can imagine the different uses of water, the different users, uses, and feedback loops within them, whether they're reusing the water itself, reusing and capturing the energy, or even finding valuable materials like phosphorus and nitrogen within the water streams. It's important to really understand these interactions in detail, very much like Dina talked about, understanding the different layers of data in the first presentation, because it ultimately helps us better understand the value of water and make sure that we have the right pricing and cost structures in place to have a efficient water system. On the next page, I want to share with you what I think of as a hierarchy of digital maturity. And I think about this because each organization, each entity working on big data and AI starts at the bottom and slowly works their way up. First, it's all about data acquisition through those sensors, your operating systems, putting that data into different structures in the cloud and data lakes. And then it's making sense of that data. So putting some visualization on top of that, looking at some trending, what we would use Power BI or other tools for. The next level up is really putting some intelligence behind that, but more rule-based. So if you have an anomalous activity beyond a threshold, you create some kind of event detection or alert. This is often the case with condition-based asset monitoring. Let's say I've got a pump used in a distribution network. I want to make sure that it's operating without failures. Next, I'm just getting to the AI part of the maturity curve here, where predictions and simulations is more about using machine learning models and other AI techniques to provide some predictive outcomes and give some decision support to our operators. And then the last level, the holy grail for me at least so far, is how do you then take those predictions and put them into an automated way to optimize your system. So an example might be in a distribution network, you have valves opening and closing based on the data that pressure sensors are collecting, telling you how the whole system is operating. And it's really important in order to get, to achieve a vision of circularity, that you must have this robust foundation of data sharing at the bottom, because otherwise you can never get to those higher level orders in this pyramid. So if we move to the next page, I asked the working groups at Water Europe, what are the challenges and the priorities that we're facing? How can we together move up that hierarchy ladder? So the first thing they told me was, in terms of their digital priorities, data availability and sharing is number one. And we heard that echoed, I think, in all the presentations today. Next, I asked about what are the barriers to adoption. And it's a little small here, but you can see in the first box, it's about lack of standards on water data representation and how to normalize. And we saw Charlotte talk a lot about the complexity of making open data platforms work, from the privacy to the sharing, even the technical standards that would allow us to share in a constructive way. What's interesting is the second one in this list is about culture and understanding. So we have both a technical challenge and a cultural challenge, and it brings a human aspect into this equation as well, which is how do we upskill and train the workforce, each other, citizens, on how to make better use of data that we are collecting. And finally, when we asked our working groups, where should we explore further, they said, Internet of Things, sensors, and AI. So it just goes to show that this whole session around big data and AI is well positioned. I want to share with you how we're tackling some of these issues at Suez. So I'll transition a little bit from Water Europe to Suez examples here. So data governance, you heard it again in the last presentation, is really important. And we're trying to really transition Suez and transform Suez into a data-driven organization. And we think about doing that in 4 different pillars. The first is about governance and clear roles and rules. We actually came to the organization and we found that there was no real good job description for data-related roles. And our team has defined 6 different key data roles: a data owner, steward, architect, engineer, scientist, and visualization expert. And each of these roles are quite different, and they have a different place in the life cycle of data. And we often find that an organization might say, we just need data scientists and all of our data woes will be solved, but that's definitely not the case, what I've learned from experience. You need the data architect, the engineers, to actually make the data available and usable for data scientists to do some of the great things that they do. So one is about really getting clear about those rules. The next one's about data architecture. So when I joined Suez, I found a lot of silos in terms of data across the organization. This is common in any large organization. How do you create a data architecture that allows data sharing within an organization, or even more so across organizations through those open data platforms, so that we can make better use of that data? Data analytics, I've seen some terrific things being done with things like Power BI and Tableau, just putting interesting visualizations on data in order to show the business value. And that is what really is low-hanging fruit to really make a better case, a better business case for why we need more data-centric approaches. And finally, but definitely not least, data culture. We at Suez are taking an approach of training everyone in our organization on the importance of data, starting with the top 100 executives and then working our way through a Data for All program. And this is a way for us to, again, show the importance of data and upskill different folks within our organization into those roles that I mentioned before. I'm going to conclude the last slide here with an example. So this is a new service or a new solution that we're bringing to market called Sludge Advanced. And for me, it's a great example of circular economy. The whole concept here is reusing and recovering sludge from wastewater treatment plants for agricultural land spreading. There's an incentive for this under the French circular law that has a principle that waste should be treated as a renewable resource. And we believe that there is an environmental and economic incentive to recovering this sludge. But it's complicated. We know that there's sensitivity around these materials, and there's a need for transparency and trust to really understand where is that sludge coming from, what are the constituents, and where does it go. And the solution that we're developing is kind of a material passport that Charlotte mentioned. It's a digital platform that allows us to collect data, take information from lab analyses, put it into a shared platform that would be used by different stakeholders, municipalities, local authorities, industrial customers, and farmers, and make sure that we can clearly understand the chain of custody and the transparency around those material flows. We are utilizing blockchain to do that and testing that out. So that's one way that we're securing that data. And we think that this will have a tremendous impact. If we look just annually at what we could avoid if we reuse this sludge, it amounts to 6,000 tons of synthetic nitrogen, 8,000 tons of phosphorus that we wouldn't have to go find, we can reuse. And for me, that's a terrific example of circularity. But it comes with a lot of data sharing challenges that we're working through with our stakeholders. With that, I'll wrap up, and I look forward to the panel discussion and any Q&A from the audience.
Really, many thanks, Andrew, for this interesting presentation that I would say it concludes perfectly the discussion for this keynote session, because it put together in the end what we discussed since the beginning. We talked about information or a clear understanding about the flow. In that case, it was talking about cities, but now we are somehow dealing with the flow in the sewage system, so it could be also applied in cities. We also talked about the needs of awareness and the change of data, and we talked about how to manage, how to governance this data. So you also mentioned the material passport that was clearly mentioned in the previous talk. So I would say the flow among this presentation, it's clear. Now I would pass the channel to Vega in order to moderate the panel session. So enjoy the next session. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Roberto, thank you. First of all, thank you all very much for your presentations. They have been very interesting and interactive. And now we are going to talk a little more about circular economy and the importance that artificial intelligence and big data have and how they can help to boost it. And additionally, how we can create awareness in the different to the different stakeholders. Now, so let's jump into the discussion. Okay, I addressed the question to one of these, but remember you can answer if you think that is important, if you want to say something sound important in some question. Alicia. Circular economy is a subject that is not yet well known. As you said, here, for example, in Spain, we have a big problem because citizens are not involved in the circular economy. And of course, there are more stakeholders. How do you think that different stakeholders can be attracted? Citizens, governments, different business, how can we attract them?
Yes, well, maybe in the stakeholders it's more the user than the company. The question here, maybe the data access is no relation to the private user data to companies, because and this is there is it in Spain now. I think maybe that citizens who recycle or carry out now in the circular economy in Spain could be finds companies that promote these actions. For example, a circular economy data and access to it should be public, in my opinion. Obligatory for companies because they have a greatest weight of their circular economy in their shoulders more than the citizens, I think, because they have more pollution in their productions in the companies than the citizens. And this platform should be voluntary for the citizens because may involve personal data which not involved in the circular economy. And it will be possible to have a public channel where the users and business can share their data, their circular data, and do synergies to make the circular economy more dynamic, more activist. This is already proposed by the SGD, by the Global Compact in the SGD 11/2013, and together proposed a value chain in consumption through the transformation of the smart city, with a final objective of reduce the carbon profit in the atmosphere, I think.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. And do you think that there are another channels in order to involve citizens? Because mobile apps are a great idea in order they have in their pocket the solution. But do you think is there any other way to involve citizens and in how the companies or governments can involve them?
Well, maybe the solution is more than these applications will be free because the user is not always in the capacity of afford more than they do. They can recycle, but they don't can pay for more new and ecological products because they are more expensive. And in Spain, this is a big problem, and this is because the user at the end don't recycle. Why I need to recycle? I have to. Why? If in the end I need to buy more recycled products and more expensive for me.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. So just a break. I also remember to the attendees that they can ask via Google Chat their own questions. Okay, thank you. Dina, we have seen that there are a lot mobile apps. For example, now with Alicia, we have seen that mobile apps are a good channel. But how could big data and artificial intelligence give really a boost at end user side? Because you are studying all the layers in Berlin, but how can improve that citizens have the awareness about circular economy?
Thank you for the question. Well, it's kind of complex question because I think it's two topics here what you address. So one of them is data collection, and that's where I totally agree with Andrew on the level system. So it's really basic. You need to start with the basic levels of data collection and how data cleaning and how you manage the data. So I think we're still right now, even like when I present the level of Berlin, we're still on the level of this data collection or on the city level. And I think it's a level zero in this case before we start talking about big data or AI in this case. Yes, some industries, they are maybe more advanced already and start introducing sensors. Also, for example, in Berlin, there is a lot of projects on smart bins. So with the one which collect waste to measure how they fill in, and so on and so forth. But I think there's still technology which should be developed further. That's one part on this. When to address your point in terms of users, it's another topic, in my opinion. It's a topic of information and still understanding of circular economy and awareness raising. What I observed, for example, from Berlin, if I look on consumers or daily citizens, I think the topic of understanding of circular economy is still not there. So people still raise the question, what is circular economy? So of course, when we talk about big data, we're still here on the stage of awareness raising and explanation. However, I do think that especially from the utilities, like utilities can also, utility sectors, they can also empower consumers, let's say, or users to understand their flows. For example, of topic of the water, what we said, actually, we are the one who also consumes the water at home, yes? So that's the one who can understand, and we receive actually, as the consumers, annual bills of understanding how much water we consumed. I think it's one of the steps which could be actually multiplied in ways like, so this is a kind of data which is shared also with consumers. And I think there is a lot of power to play around that, to impact consumer understanding how it actually could be, how we can basically impact our consumption, for example, on such stream as the water or as well the energy. It's a little bit different from the product flows as a consumer, so something which we consume as a food maybe, or when we buy particular products in the shops. This is a data which is still undiscovered, but I believe on the level of water or energy, it's possible to impact consumer because it's actually the data which is shared with them. Another maybe problem, I would also maybe bring here example of water. That if I look at consumer side, so we don't really have a decision making how the water flow is operating, for example, in the building, because it's already incorporated in the system where I move in, and usually this cascading view of reuse of water flows in the building, I am as a consumer, I can't make it because I have all pipes brought together and everything is in my building is something which, I can't really make an impact on that. And I think on this level, it's really important to explain consumers how we can actually generate the flows or cascading approaches. For example, for the example of water, to reuse the water in the building means that the people who live understand the need of different piping systems, understand how and on which stage they can actually reuse, for example, water for different loops systems. I think that's why it was for me, very interesting to see that we had today discussion on the water on this example, because I think it's such a powerful stream, which sometimes we don't really, we think only about products, but water is a very, very important stream to also address circular economy in this case. So that would be my view on this.
Okay, now I think that the question is for Dina and Charlotte. You can answer the question about how to get access to different data sets across stakeholders. What is the difference between public and private public data and private data, and how companies need to adapt to these business models to achieve the regulations, maybe when regulation change, what they need. Charlotte, Dina, what you want?
Charlotte, do you want to catch us on this question?
Yeah, go for it. I can complement then on the maybe more legal side, if that's fine for you.
Well, I'm not a specialist on the data part, I would say, but I basically learned a lot also from the presentation of Charlotte in terms of data approach and how it should be shared. But I, again, maybe highlight on this. I think right now we kind of lack of regulation on particular, like enforcing data collection. That's would be my point on this. And again, I will come to the example of inflow materials. clearly, if I'm talking about like for example, on the waste, we have this data, at least on the city level, how much waste is produced. We don't have specific specifications on which companies are doing that, but we can define by the sectors. And this is something I think is already a good step. And it would be very important also to start to collect kind of a data, how much is actually inflow, for example, on the city level. And so far as I know, this type of data is now not enforced to be collected. That's why there is no also public statistics on that. And it's very difficult. So there are different research projects to just kind of collect bits by bits on how much of this data is there, but there is no really kind of incentives as well to do this. And that's where I would believe that regulation can really empower this. So we don't need right now on this stage specific data, in my opinion, which company, we need also to understand materials behind the products, but I will not go to this debate because it's very complicated, but in terms of all the volume, how much actually is incoming into the city, for example, or particular households in terms of consumption, this I think we can actually use regulation to enforce this type of data collection.
Okay, thanks. And now, Andrew, from your point of view, from your experience, what are the main risks, pitfalls to be considered when AI and big data are being used in the context of circular economy projects?
Sure. So I can share a few anecdotes from my experience working on accelerating some of these AI projects at Suez. And the things that I think can really create pitfalls or risks is dictating the time to market of a solution based on the quality of the data, based on the user adoption, and finally based on kind of the scale up plans for scalability. I'll just share a couple of examples. In one project, we were trying to develop an algorithm to do some predictive maintenance for an asset. And we were trying to get access to some good quality data that one of our business units had. But in order to get access to that data, it was actually in Australia. They needed to ship a hard drive with a terabyte of data to France for us to then download and try to make use of. And even when we got into it, it was not exactly what we needed. So we thought we had a good opportunity, a good use case, but access and quality to data will always dictate your ability to do that. The second one is really around user adoption. So we had another algorithm working on waste detection in one of our businesses, and we deployed it at one of our plants, and we started to train some of the operators to use the solution. Well, as you can imagine, waste treatment processing plants on the ground are not the most technical type of operations. And so there was a bit of a learning curve in terms of how do we incorporate an AI algorithm into detecting different kinds of waste. So it took a bit of additional user adoption and coaching to spend time on the site with the users to make sure that we heard their feedback and adapted the solution to be, to their needs and actually augment their job. So we wanted to augment the operator at the end of the day. And then finally, a lot of the projects that we do these proof of concepts. We get some good results from big data AI type of use cases. But the real question, the real risk come when you figure out how to scale up. So how do you start to make solutions that can go across geographic boundaries and work in multiple languages? Or for AI, you have a feedback loop so that every kind of detection that you're making in the field comes back as part of the training of the algorithm to make it improve over time. That requires a lot of thoughtful design in terms of the architecture and the scale up of the solution. And that's often overlooked sometimes in the early stages of a project, but can really dictate the success in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I also like one thing that you said about a cultural aspect. I think that it's important that companies and all stakeholders have a vision or a vision of AI and big data, because if not, we can do anything about about data, and we can work with it. And we need to share this information in order people or stakeholders encouraged to share their data. I think so. I don't know if you agree with me or not.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Last, Charlotte, from the legal point of view, which policies, regulations are more relevant to enable a circular economy? Which laws are relevant? How regulations evolve?
Thank you for the question. It's a very broad question, and actually, it's currently being discussed at the annual Circular Economy Stakeholder Conference that the European Commission is leading today and tomorrow. I guess it's too late to register, but probably the slides and summaries will be available, and they are discussing this question. It's a very well, what they say at the European Commission, and I think it's true, they say we need to come together, like all the DGs have to come together. Of course, like all organizations, they might be tempted to work a bit in silos. So you have DG Environment, DG Connect, DG blah, blah, Consumer, blah, 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 Internal Market. And they really need to work together. And I think it's true that the circular economy, well, it's a concept. It's so broad. If you take it seriously, I think it takes a lot of policy and regulation. Just to name a few, it's clear that we need consumer protection. So protection against greenwashing claims, for instance, could be a good start. In France, they are currently dealing with a new law passed in the last month, I think, or last year, on which information should be provided by producers to the consumers, for instance, on reuse, recyclability, etc., so that they can make an informed choice. But that's only the consumer side, and it's only about giving incentives for consumers to consume right, so to say. But then you have plenty of other things you would need to do. If we take only the data angle, which is already a very broad one, I joined Dina when she answered the question how to get access to data sets across stakeholders. I really liked what she said about the fact that we have a piecemeal approach in a way, so we're able to collect data, a few data here, a few data there. Sometimes we have regulation to get this type of data and this, but we don't have, as for now, we don't have a general horizontal approach. So to give you an example, environmental data that I talked about in my presentation, for some of them, they are obviously relevant for the circular economy. You can also think of REACH, so the REACH regulation that is about chemicals. So companies that produce or use chemicals, they have to notify this to a European agency. There's a whole process there. So such data are obviously relevant with the circular economy. But if you talk to materials engineers, they would say, the problem we have is we're always lagging behind innovation. And in a way that's good, that there is innovation in new materials that might be more efficient, etc., etc. But because of this, if you enact regulations saying, for instance, where manufacturers have to give information on this type of electronics or this type of chemicals, but the day after you will have new chemicals, new electronics, and then the law is outpaced. So that's a problem that we at KU Leuven, we try to deal with colleagues from materials engineering, because as a lawyer, I don't have enough concrete insight. So we try to work together on, well, okay, based on this observation that for the time being, we have a piecemeal approach in the law. And as a matter of fact, the law gets outpaced very quickly. How can we deal with it? And that's I think, a very broadly shared conclusion that we need materials passport, maybe aside products passports, I think products passport might not be enough. You also want to look at the materials in itself. The question is how to govern it, how to indeed, well, at some point you have to regulate, you have to say, well, producers, they have to produce or collect and deliver system information, then the other actors in the value chain, they have to also contribute to some extent. And yeah, I do think that this materials passport, products passports concept, they can be very helpful in, opening the path towards right policies. But I know I'm still very high level. Obviously, I don't think anyone has a readily available solution. But I think it's definitely a way to go.
Okay.
Can I add to this a little bit? Do we have time on that?
Yes, 1 or 2 minutes.
I just thought, because I totally agree with Charlotte on the part which she mentioned. However, once we had a also session on the plastic packaging, and I think that clearly it's important, of course, to introduce material passports to understand the material identity from the production to the end of chain. But sometimes I also ask a question: how many materials we actually need for the production? I think it's also we need to. I mean, as a society or in terms of regulation, it's important to understand first, we need to take a look on the particular material streams which we're talking, because it's not unified. Do we talk about packaging, which is where the lifespan of the product is maybe 5 minutes or 1 week, or we talk about construction materials, which obviously are in implementation much longer. So, and then it comes to the point from we design new materials, do we really need this amount of new materials for particular application? And I think that's where regulation should be also very, very precise. And I believe right now, unfortunately, from my critical view on this as an NGO representative, I still think it's still important to be more ambitious on material specification and product specification flows, and then to really be specific how many materials we need to design and how ambitious we should do that, because otherwise it will be always this problem of one starting point is faster than another.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if Charlotte, there are any question from the audience?
I was just looking at that. There's one question by Shamuga asking, what do you mean by data reuse? And I think that's for Charlotte, if I remember that correctly, or if anyone feels able to answer that. What do you mean by data reuse?
Yes, okay, by data reuse, I mean that data might have an initial use, but they could also be reused by the same entity or by other entities. So for instance, you could think of producers of goods that produce data on the goods just because they use this data to produce the good, on the materials, on the density, on humidity, on whatever. They use the data they produce for the production. But then such data could also be very useful for a range of other actors. So if you think of statistics, for instance, well, statistics, public authorities might need this information to be more informed, to have more documented reports on materials, on the efficiency of materials, etc., etc. You could also think of new business models based on recyclability, reuse of products. They would use this data to, well, keep the good in use or in good use throughout the life cycle, or to, I don't know, well, reuse the good, recycle it, to repair it, etc., etc. It's just a small example, but somebody came up with this idea that we should call this circular data, in the sense that data can be reused for many different purposes. We know this from the big data landscape, so to say, that there is a lot of benefits in sharing data because of this capacity of data to be reused for a range of new purposes. And the question then is, well, in the case where data could be reused by third parties, so by somebody else than the initial data producer and data holder, how to have a fair balance? Because of course, the producer that produced the goods and the related data has a right to be protected for this effort. That's the freedom to conduct a business. If they were not, then, well, would be the end of his business at all. But on the other hand, if you want to make the circular economy come true, you need some data to be reused by other entities, public or private, but anyway, other entities that might not have a contractual relationship with the manufacturer, to give this example. I think that's a very big challenge. I take the opportunity to say that I agree with Dina on the material aspect, that we also need to filter out in a way new materials, that some of them could be problematic. I think in the same way as chemicals, in a way, that we have this legislation on which that could be made better, but I think it's a good starting point that could be further expanded.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. I think that's all the questions from the audience so far.
Okay, then thanks for all of you. And maybe Roberto, you can, the floor is yours in order to finish.
Thank you, Vega. Thank you, all of you. I would also to close giving another, highlighting another sentence that came out from the discussion, that was okay. Data reuse is fine, is good, but not per se, because reusing data without a specific aim, it would make probably the system again unsustainable. So it's a matter also of focusing exactly why we are using data. So I think this was a really another interesting point. So many thanks for all of you from the keynote speakers. Again, thank you, Dina, thank you, Alicia, thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Andrew, for your time, for your really interesting presentation. Please keep in touch, because several interesting aspects came out from the discussion. So maybe we can try to focus on other discussion in the future, or even opportunity. I would just remind that the main session for the society, for this smart societal application track, will be on next Thursday at 2 p.m. It will focus on AI and big data for smart cities, in the environment of smart cities. And then just after, at the end, we are going to have another parallel session that will focus on AI and big data in e-government domain. That session will be sponsored, as mentioned at the beginning, by 3 projects funded under H2020, Do It, Big Policy, Policy Cloud, and Urbanite. Thanks again for your time. I hope you enjoyed this time with us, and have a nice evening.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.